Today, I wish to talk about something that I experienced here about 2 months ago, I suppose. And that was the storytelling festival, the storytelling conference that was broadcast here back in, let's see, it was the virtual storytelling conference that was being broadcast out of, I think that's pronounced Chennai, India, which is part of Tamil Nadu. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of the people who were part of this virtual storytelling festival were all over the world. And I thought that was really fascinating to be able to see those people. And a lot of them actually sounded like they were Americans or British who actually moved over into these countries. And then, of course, there are other Europeans that were just in their countries doing their storytelling and bringing forth the kinds of things that they had experienced and a lot of the stories that they had to tell. Some of these stories, of course, I had actually never heard before. And yet, when I hear them talk about it, it almost sounds like these stories were really old traditional stories that have been handed down. And for some reason, I really hadn't heard of them. And I thought that was kind of great. The stories that people had to tell. There are also some workshops there where they went in to kind of give people experience and practice talking and telling stories. Sadly, I could not get into storytelling workshops because this was an all day event that was 24 hours long, and I just could not focus on all of that and also be able to deal with my family and being able to take care of them and doing what I needed to do to be with my family as well. That's just the way things are here. And as I went to folklore conferences as well, it's just one of those things that you cannot possibly go to every single event that's taking place. You just have to pick and choose and do what you do your best. The last workshop that they had, there was a Maori. A Maori's a native Polynesian from New Zealand that was really passionate when she talked and when she was there discussing different kinds of stories that she had to tell. She had a couple interesting stories that dealt with things like Polynesian culture, but also cultures from a lot of other areas. And she had a really passionate way of doing things. And the conference that she ran basically talked about she was getting people really into how she presented Polynesian culture. She would show all of the greetings of the different Polynesian cultures. She started out by saying greetings in like eight of the different Polynesian languages. And of course, I only really know how to say two of them off the top of my head, which were aloha, which is the Hawaiian, which most people probably know, and talofa, which is the, I think that's the Tongan. It might be Samoan, but I'm pretty sure it's Tongan. And she really wanted people to get engaged and to think things through. And she would go and she would sing a song, and then she would come out again and get people to try and react and pretty much go over a lot of the different ideas that Polynesian culture brings out, and especially with their stories. I did a research paper on a folk tale, of course, that dealt with a character named Sina or Hina, depending on the Polynesian culture you're talking about. And the story's called Sina and the Eel or Hina and the Eel. And each time the story was told by these different people, of course, you have the different versions and one or several versions of the story, like the Samoan, the Tongan, and the Tahitian, and a couple others versions of that story were about how coconuts came into being because coconuts are a important staple of Polynesian food, and those studying the foodways of the world are going to be really interested in maybe what the traditions and understandings of that particular food are and how they think that those came about. But another version, I I know it's a Maori version that says this, but somehow it almost sounded like there was a Hawaiian version that used the same understanding of the eel, which seems kind of strange because they have coconuts there as well. But the Maori story, because there are no coconuts in New Zealand, and the Maori story actually has the eel being kind of the precursor of several eel species. So when they kill the eel, every story talks about the eel being killed for one reason or another. Sometimes for noble purposes, it sacrifices itself, and other times the eel's a monster that must be killed. The Maori version is the latter, of course, that the eel must be killed. And when the eel's head is cut off, the eel's body is kind of spread out, and you get two different kinds of eel species. One's a river eel, another one's kind of an ocean eel. With this particular story of Sina, or Hina and the eel in this case, the story is about how the food of the eel came about. So since there's no coconuts, it has to be a different food staple, and it just so happens that eels were things that were eaten by the people there. I someday want to be able to really tell a good version of that story myself. These workshops, of course, were to help people to be able to go and tell their stories and to be able to go through without chopping things up. That's something that I still really need to work with. In my LinkedIn profile, I do say that I am a storyteller. A lot of times, the kinds of stories that I tell, I do best when I'm writing rather than when I'm speaking, because you can always stop, think, and then write something else, edit it, whatever. In recordings, the best you can do, as long as it's not live, if you're performing live, you can probably have some issues. But the stories that people do with recording audio, you can always say, whoops, I messed that up, so I'm going to do it correct this time, and then I'll get rid of the choppy bad stuff and then put this good stuff in there. You just have to be careful about where you're recording it because you don't want the transferred version to have a sudden different audio sound than the rest of the story. But that's kind of modern day issues as far as storytelling goes. But going back to the storytelling, I feel that storytelling is really an important aspect of culture. I think a lot of people today think that storytellers are not really that important. You can read books or you can watch movies, you can see videos that people create. So the videos, of course, a lot of those stories there, of course, are being told by storytellers, but you can also kind of throw in all of these visuals and things to back it up so that you have people's eyes glued to you. In this conference, several people, when they were telling their stories, they had a couple visual things, but they emphasize a lot of the audio things as well. And one thing that one of the storytellers did was she had, I don't know if it was a bowron, which is an Irish kind of drum, or if it was just another kind of drum that she was using. And she was telling her story. Her name is Rebecca Lemaire, I believe, and she lives in Spain. She kind of had a British accent, way things sounded, but I'm not going to assume anything because you'd be surprised how people move around and what they consider themselves when they get to different places. And so this is the woman at the end of the world, is what the story was. She was hitting this drum every now and then whenever a character was moving from one place to another. She started hitting this drum and then she was doing several kinds of repetitions. It really kind of got you visualizing how this person might be moving along between one place and another. I'm not going to tell her story, obviously, because I really I don't have it written down or anything. I just kind of have some notes that I took when she was telling it. But the way that she did this story as well is she actually changed the ending to be more of a happy ending than most people do with this story. Taking a story and making it your own, of course, is one of the major things that you need to do when you are telling a story. One other thing that a lot of people do when they're telling their stories is they end up throwing in a lot of music and singing when it comes into telling it. One of the people that was at this festival that really kind of caught your attention is she would jump into singing in a certain Indian language. I cannot remember which one it was, but she said that this was kind of a regional traditional song that she did. Every time that she jumped into this song, whether you knew the language or not, it was something that brought your focus back to the story so that they can really embed things in. It's kind of like when you have a chorus of something with a song where the words themselves mean nothing. They just kind of sound nice and sweet, and they're kind of an interval between the main part of the song and then the next verse. There's one storyteller that I want to tell you about, and then I'm going to revert back to the Maori storyteller that I told you about before. Just so you know, the Maori storyteller, her name, well, she had a longer Polynesian name. I think it's Takitua, Turao Takitua, but she always went by Tu because that's easier for people to remember. Anyways, that's the Maori storyteller I told you about. Another one of the storytellers, he was from Southern California, if I'm not mistaken. And his name is Michael McCarty. I think he goes by Michael D. McCarty when he does his particular storytelling. He has a show called Have a Mouth, Will Run with It, and he really does run with it, and it's really good. One of the things that he emphasized was that everybody, has something that really that they can be passionate about, and when you have a personal story that you can tell that is really something, an event that's significant to you, you really need to perfect it, and you need to be able to present it in a way so that other people can really relate to what you're saying. If you are just telling a story that go rambling on and on, I hope I don't sound like I'm rambling too much, but if you just sound like you're rambling on and on, then that story isn't quite as important, doesn't sound as important to the person listening to it as it might to the person who's saying it. He talked about somebody who had this story about how he had messed up his life early on. When he got out of prison, he went and he told his story about how he got to where he was. And he presented it in such a way that it was really powerful. He had a way of actually telling his story in third person. He implied that telling your story in third person can a lot of times be more powerful. I will have to think about that. If you're telling a personal story, do you always need to say it in third person? Of course, most of the stories that I heard at this festival were told in third person because they were other people's stories that you were telling. Now, going back to Tu, the Maori woman, she says that in order for you to be a good storyteller, you have to be able to tell your own story before you try telling somebody else's. That kind of hit me, and I was thinking, okay, so how can I relate that to myself? And I was thinking about the kinds of stories about myself that I can tell. There are several different kinds of stories. I served a mission as a mission with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The story as to what made me go and do that when I had spent most of my early years saying I absolutely would not do it. That was a story that I had told several times to people because it was a spiritual thing and it really people can relate to it when they are trying to think about things in a religious setting. I have another story, though, that is kind of strange and can be kind of interesting to people who are in a classroom. The last 3 years, I have been a teacher and instructor teaching introductory English. I always emphasize to my students that I am a folklorist, and therefore, a lot of things that I do, I kind of lay it out in a storytelling setting because some of the first assignments that we always ask the students to write, they happen to be something to the effect of tell us a story about you, tell us a story about a group that you're associated with, if you are a member of a club, if you are a member of an organization like, say, the Lighthouse Society, which I'm a member of, or a story about being part of a football culture, or if you are part of something like the Folklore Society, there are always all kinds of stories that you can tell about experiences that you have. And one of the stories that I always tell is that when I was younger, when I was just getting out of high school, the common practice, of course, was that, well, you get out of high school, that means now it's time to go to college. You need to pick a major, and then you need to focus and get your work done. One of the things I didn't realize when I was just getting out of high school, of course, is that college classes are actually quite a bit more intense than your typical high school classes. And so you can easily say, "Oh, look, I can go sign up for these 6 classes, 18 credits, and I can be done by lunchtime because, you have your Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes and you have your Tuesday, Thursday classes. You can have everything done by noon, 1 o'clock or something, and then you have all this other free time afterwards." What you do not realize, of course, is that when you do that, for just about every class that's 3 credits, you need to work probably about 6 hours a day just trying to stay on top of things. Now, it might not be 6 hours a day, it might be like 6 hours. Well, not 6 hours a day, sorry, I meant 6 hours a week, like 2 hours a day, that you are going to be focused only on that. And then on the next 3 credit class, you need another 6 hours a week in order to do that as well. And then another 6 hours a week until you get to a point where it's like, oh, now I have to multiply 6 by 18. What does that equal? And how much time is that going to eat up every day? And there are the occasional students, of course, who are perfect and just do awesome at everything. And they're thinking, oh, why is this so hard for you? I can hear this one time and I can remember it and I don't need to worry about anything else. But your average student is not like that. Because I was being reckless like that, I ended up really screwing up my first 3 years of college. Thankfully, it was a community college and it didn't cost me a lot of money to go there. Back when I was that age, community colleges, I just totally ruined my introductory education. And so instead of being able to get an associate's degree using, chunk change, nowadays the community colleges, at least the ones in Utah, definitely cost you a lot more money. But I completely messed that up. And what I decided to do after that was I was living in California at the time, Clayton, California, if you know where that is. That's in northeastern Bay Area near San Francisco. What I did is I up and I moved to Utah thinking that there I could go and I can start over and I could go to BYU there and I can go and get the degree the same way that all my brothers and sisters did because, well, my brothers at least all went to BYU and they got their bachelor's degrees there. But when I went there, that's when I suddenly realized that, well, of course, I can't get into BYU with the grades that I had. And so what I did is I attended what then was called Utah Valley Community College, UVCC. Of course, I would like take a class here and take a class there. It was expensive at first because it was out of state tuition. When you go there and you're taking that class, first I was kind of making things going along a lot slower because I did not have a whole lot of money at that time in order to go and get my education. And because I was going that slow, I also realized, dang, this will take forever. And of course, BYU, I wanted to get in there, and I found out that BYU actually had summer classes where you don't have to pass any kind of evaluations. They just take everybody in like a community college does to let you go and do things. So I went and I took classes there. I got a few credits in, and then, of course, I did some home study classes. Then I decided to be a missionary, of course, at that time, but right after that. But at that time, I'd really only done a few credits here and there, and I really didn't have a whole lot on my under my belt to do things. And so, any 4 year college I wanted to go to, I had to really push in a whole lot more of my work because if I transferred there, I had to transfer all the crap from Diablo Valley College, which was the California Junior College, as well as any of these better stuff that I did later. And then there are always those required classes that everyone has to take. Getting back to the focus here, then, is when I got back from being a missionary, I still really I did not get very far. I tried again to do a little bit more college, but I just couldn't really get a lot of things in. I don't know. I had just completely lost my focus. Maybe at that time I no longer cared about going to college, getting a degree. I had always wanted to be an astrophysicist. Unfortunately, I was terrible at math, and so I kind of felt dejected and like I didn't really care anymore. It wasn't until after I was divorced from my first marriage that I suddenly realized, look, you can't be an astrophysicist. You know that. What else interests you? And what else can you do? Because working fast food or working at Walmart is just not doing it for you anymore. You just are not feeling inspired. You're stuck in this rut. So I decided, okay, I'm going to see what I can do here. University of Phoenix was where I ended up going and I ended up getting an associate's degree there, but then unfortunately I ended up getting stuck with this associate's degree in business that really was not worth that much. It's like, well, I got my associate's degree. That's great. Now I can take the next step. But then when I tried transferring those grades, I think almost nothing was transferable from University of Phoenix to anywhere else I wanted to go. And of course, I was kind of stuck there, uncertain what to do because in California, no junior college, there was no other colleges close by that I could go to while working at Walmart at the same time because I had to make money. After all of this, then I had to take some online classes. Most of them were at Utah State, but one of them was at Western Nevada Community College, and another one was at BYU. And I just needed to stay actively engaged in school. Otherwise, I'd have to pay back these loans that I got for $14,000 that I didn't realize I was accumulating until it was too late. And so I had to stay in school to keep from needing to pay that back immediately. And gradually, I just finally decided, all right, I'm finishing my bachelor's degree. I'm moving back to Utah. I, of course, wanted to be a geologist at this time, but I also kind of wanted to do a co-major with the English literature department. Of course, English literature I have always been interested in. I just did not always realize that maybe that's the major that I'd want to do. I was doing both of these things at the same time. And then eventually I just pressed forward and finished that English degree. And I stopped geology basically because I thought that, well, I don't think I can keep up with this math. It always makes sense when the teacher draws it on the board, but then after 10 minutes, you kind of forgot how we did it. So I got that English degree and I felt so relieved. I had attended 6 colleges in order to get that degree, and I finally got it in 2011. So I started my college career in 1991, and I finally got my bachelor's degree in 2011. So take that as you will. It was a great accomplishment, but of course, I wasn't able to go and become a teacher until I got my master's degree at Utah State. I found to my chagrin that because I did not do much like internship wise or other things, that were activities that I could add to a resume. I was not able to get any kinds of jobs I wanted because I had no experience. And of course, you can't get experience because you don't have a job. Unfortunately, I kind of screwed over the opportunities that I had to get that because I was so focused on getting the degree that I was not getting the other experience I needed. My solution, of course, was to go and get my master's degree. And I ended up choosing folklore because that just really fascinated me, that topic. And the moment that I found out there was such a thing as a master's degree in folklore, I decided, my gosh, I have to have that degree. I love storytellers. I love folk music. I especially like hearing ghost stories and hearing music about tragic events or other things. And folk art is really interesting. Seeing how people come up with different kinds of foods, ethnic foods from different regions, or you see different kinds of buildings and everything, the architecture that is just unique to that area for one reason or another. I ended up finding out all kinds of other things that I just did not realize existed. I don't know if you've ever been to a graveyard and noticed that on the gravestones there's kind of a gradual change as the years go by as to the images and the pictures that you see on those gravestones. I just was so engrossed in that, and finally I did get that folklore degree. And at the same time, I ended up working with Utah Public Radio, and that was a really great experience where I was able to go out and use creativity and to be able to really be able to express things a lot better as I was gathering a lot of aspects of folklore. I ended up interviewing several students who were also into folklore. And I think I got a lot of them actually interested in radio as well, because it just so happens that Utah Public Radio's main building happens to be on Utah State's campus. That was really a great experience. And then, of course, I also worked with Aggie Radio, which is the university's local radio station, and I was able to post a lot of my podcasts onto Aggie Radio's podcast. And I do want to work on other things in the media area as time progresses as well, because I do like writing and other things. The education that I went through, I just have to tell you that once you start going in there, you just have to take things really seriously and do not be discouraged when something just doesn't work out. You just say, okay, I need to get up there. I need to work on this. And I know I can do this. The English thing I was able to persevere with really well. As for science, I'm still interested in those scientific things. I am just not as engrossed in them as I used to be. But a lot of times, studying geology or astrophysics, just looking at the stars, looking at the beautiful world that's out there. If you go out in the ocean on the coast and look out on the fog across the ocean where you can't see the other side of the world, you do not see land where you're looking out. That is just so inspiring to me to be able to do that. And hearing the crashing of the waves and smelling the salt water is just really invigorating sometimes. And that might be because I'm from California originally. Always make sure that do not give up on your dreams just because once or twice you might find yourself knocked down, because there's always other opportunities out there. You might need to realize if your dreams might be a little too high, but you should always keep your eyes open for those opportunities as they come up, because if you give up, then no opportunities are going to present themselves. If you just sit there on the ground all day, food isn't just going to land into your lap no matter what some other people might have to say about it. If you do not even try, you are not going to get where you want to be. That is one of my stories. I know I could probably tell a little bit better. Maybe I'll write it down so I can have a better, smoother way of saying it. But we all have stories to tell. Once we are able to tell our story really well, then we can more better tell someone else's story. I'll have to see if I can turn that into a third person story at some time. I am not putting the real deep emotion into it here like I hear some other storytellers telling you, where they really raise their voice and they fill it in with emotional voice. But this story, of course, is not something that evokes tears or really isn't an emotional knee jerk reaction, or it doesn't really jerk your heart too much. Though it really did to me when I thought back and I looked back on what my life was and how I got here. So, this is what I have to say about storytelling for now. I really enjoyed this virtual storytelling conference out of Chennai, and I am hoping that they do have other storytelling festivals that are online that I can work with in the future. There was a storytelling workshop that I could have paid to do, but I just did not have time to do that. And I didn't have $100 just laying around at the time. So, but I am going to keep working on storytelling because I think that that is something that really can be uplifting. You tell your stories, you feel a lot better about yourself, and you feel like you can do a lot more because your story shows that you are able to accomplish things that you may not have even realized that you were able to do. Until next time, I will end it there. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Talk to you soon.